Tell me the story. What happened at Christmas 1814?
The two main characters behind what happened in 1814 are, first of all, a young Māori chief of Ngāpuhi named Ruatara. His pa was called Rangihaua in Oihi Bay, which is in the Bay of Islands about 30 minutes from Kerikeri. And secondly, the Reverend Samuel Marsden, who is the chaplain to the penal colony of New South Wales, with a home in Parramatta, Sydney. These two men had first met and I guess begun some kind of a friendship around 1804. Ruatara had then travelled quite extensively. One of his travels took him to England, where he believed he would have an audience with King George III, who'd love to meet a young Māori chief of his standing. However, when he reached there, sailors laughed at him for wanting to meet King George III. He was locked in the bowels of the ship and even denied wages for the services he had performed on that ship. Struggling to find a way to get rid of him, they found a convict ship going to Australia and he was placed upon this, where it's believed he was depressed and also sick, potentially with tuberculosis, so he may have been coughing up blood. This is where the Reverend Samuel Marsden recognised him and took him back to his own family's cabin where they nursed him back to health. And then Ruatara continued to stay with Marsden in Parramatta, Sydney for a period of time after that, learning various things, but certainly including some agricultural skills. Long story short, Ruatara finds his way back to New Zealand. No ships are willing to sail to New Zealand because a ship further north called the Boyd had been attacked, most of its occupants killed, and people were too fearful to come to New Zealand. Ruatara had discussed with Marsden the possibility of setting up a mission station in New Zealand at his pa to serve his people. And so Marsden purchased a ship named the Active. A couple of guys went to New Zealand for a recce trip to see if they could find Ruatara or any others they knew, and they did. And Ruatara, along with Chiefs Hongihika and Korokoro, hopped on that ship and went back to Australia. At the end of that, they took Marsden and a few other families, 3 other families, back to New Zealand. They arrived in 1814, and just a few short days later, it was the first Sunday, which very poetically was Christmas Day. Ruatara built a pulpit using a black cloth. He overturned some waka to serve as pews, and then he gathered a crowd of 300 to 400 Māori, and the Reverend Samuel Marsden stood to preach about the great tidings of good news, the Christmas story. Ruatara explained what was said afterwards, and although it wasn't probably very well understood, he said that by and by the people would understand. The Māori present then performed a haka to honour the occasion. This is a significant point in our nation's history because the gospel of Jesus went on to have a truly significant impact upon Māori and for the good. It was also immediately followed by the first Pākehā settlement in New Zealand, where Ruatara hosted 3 families, the Kings, the Kendalls and the Halls, to stay on in New Zealand to serve amongst his people. So this is what happened in 1814. It's one of our nation's most significant beginning points in terms of our bicultural history, and to all extents and purposes was a positive beginning.